Good morning.
And joining us from our Lagos Network studios, we have three guests there. But first, we'd like to welcome Professor Abiola Sani, who is a professor of commercial law in the Faculty of Law, University of Lagos, and is also the current chairman of the National Tax Policy Review Committee. Professor Abiola Sani, he is not the one on the screen you are seeing right now. Of course, at the right time, he will be punched on the screen for you to see him. That's Professor Abiola Sani, is the current chairman of the National Tax Policy Review Committee for 2017.
You can hear us?
All
right, thank you. Okay, let me quickly introduce another guest who, of course, is seated right there in Lagos studio. He is Mr. Ayo Salami. Mr. Ayo Salami is a partner, KPMG. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Salami. All right, I get Kingsley.
That's right. As I said, that's Ayo Salami that you saw a moment ago. We're having some audio challenges. We do hope that the audio snag will be cleared by the time we're returning to our Lagos Network studios. First, the chair of the FIROS. It's tax and taxation and all related issues have been in the news in recent times. Of course, the latest being VADEs. That's the Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme. But of course, all of that is part of a whole scheme of arrangement by the government to ensure that there's greater tax efficiency, there are higher returns, as it were, from taxation. Give us a lowdown on precisely what's going on and what are the various ramifications of the new agenda in driving the tax agenda, seeking to drive the tax revenue of the administration.
And I'm trying to put it in very simple terms. In terms of the number of adults who are working, who are earning an income, who are making profit on business, we have less than 20% of them paying taxes. Now, last year, we were able to grow the individual tax base by 4 million, from 10 to 14, which was about a 40%, but there's still a lot of room to grow. We estimate we have at least 70 million Nigerians who are making some type of income, either selling from shops, selling from their car booths, or transacting some kind of business from their offices or homes. And of course, they should be paying taxes on their profit. Now, why should they pay tax? It's basically to empower governments to provide all the things that you and I require: infrastructure, healthcare, education. Now, in terms of the economic impact it has, anytime you empower a government, either at the federal level or the state level, to carry out more projects, they give those contracts out to local businessmen. Those local businessmen or contractors employ people to carry out those functions. You want to build a new road, they have to employ people to carry that out. You want to build a school, they employ people. So there's a multiplier effect in terms of the economy. And if you look at our tax to GDP ratio, under 10, people estimate about 6%. You'll find out that on a monthly basis, the input by government expenditure is so little that it's not enough to drive the economy, and at the same time, not enough to provide the services that you and I require.
All right, thank you.
What is the emphasis on personal income tax? Because, as you know, there are a wide variety of taxes. Those persons who are selling from their car booths or those who are selling in shops, they pay all kinds of fees for permits, for levies and rates that all tiers of government impose and seek to collect from them. So what is the current emphasis? Is it on personal income tax?
Well, the emphasis is on both. Just that you see at the corporate level, we have been able to cover a large percentage of those. Last year, we were able to add about 800,000 corporate organizations. But in terms of the individuals, I'll give you a little analysis. Small-scale businesses, their membership is 37.5 million. The total number of individuals on our tax net right now is 14.5. So even if you just look at the small-scale businessmen and women, and you add them on, that will grow automatically to 37.5. Now, the issue is that if they even pay a minimum amount of tax, they pay 5,000 naira or pay 2,500. Like I had I attended a conference in Ghana, and I was trying to talk to them about tax revenue. And I gave a typical example. to save a child from dying from malaria is less than 5,000 naira for the malaria medicine. So if you even had an additional 30 million Nigerians pay 5,000 naira, the impact on the economy, the impact on our standard of living and our welfare is tremendous. So basically, we believe that if all states are empowered by tax revenue, the federal government is also empowered because the taxes that we generate is shared between 3 tiers of government. So basically, as we focus on the corporate side, we'll also focus on the individuals. Now, sometime last year, we did an initial tax amnesty for corporate organizations for those who hadn't paid or had outstandings, and about 2,700 corporate organizations came into the nets, paid their outstandings, and on that alone, within 45 days, we were able to generate 27 billion naira, which was equally shared among the 3 tiers of government. So as people pay tax, as corporate organizations pay what is due, then we're empowering governments who will be able to serve us better.
All right. Let's pause you for a while, Mr. Fowler. Let's get to Lagos. Professor Sani, the tax to GDP ratio, the low tax to GDP ratio at the moment is linked with, of course, our tax administration system. And in some of the your presentations, you've talked about the need to review our tax system, our tax laws, which you described as obsolete. You also asked for a review of, our collection system. Could you tell us a bit of what is wrong with our tax administration and how has it affected, the tax to GDP ratio?
Very much clear. The statistics is very embarrassing to us as a nation, and this is a fact that we all know. But one very important point at this time is that government is trying to do something decisive and conscious about it. If you look at the percentage of 6 all over the world, that seems to be the lowest. So what tax administration is doing now is to ramp up all the databases and streamline the number of taxpayers and then widen the tax base in order to bring fresh and new taxpayers into the tax net. We have a situation where the focus has always been on very few compliant corporate taxpayers and also those who are under the payee system. So the VADE scheme, it's a strategy, a unique one for that matter, to bring those who have not been paying into the tax net, those for good or bad reasons have not been complying, and also to encourage people to come clean so that they can sort out their tax affairs. And this is a unique opportunity, in my view, that nobody should miss. Because if you miss the boat at the end of nine months, government is justified to come after you and then demand for full payment and also prosecute in accordance with the provisions of the law.
Well, Professor Sani, just before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of the tax policy which your committee is reviewing, tell us some more about the VADEs. What does it entail? I mean, who should step forward to voluntarily declare assets and income and then make payment, and how? What is the procedure?
Very much, Kingsley. Our committee had already reviewed the policy, and part of the recommendation is that there should be tax amnesty, which has now come in the form of VADEs. VADE is a time-limited opportunity for those who have not been complying with the tax law to do so. It requires a review of internal processes to see whether people have been complying, and there are people who have never filed annual tax return in their lifetime. And this signals something very significant to those who are high net worth and have never paid. If you look at cases, there are people who rush to pay their tax for political reasons in order just to get tax clearance to fulfill the requirement of the electoral law. So basically, VADEs, which covers all taxes, is providing a unique opportunity for those who could have been prosecuted at the moment an opportunity to regularize and be on the right side. Government could have gone after tax defaulters as it is, but government recognizes the need to get the buy-in of taxpayers because the current attitude is to engage taxpayers as critical stakeholders and approach them as customers. So at the moment, the challenge is for those who have been under-deducting, those who have never filed annual returns, and those who have not been remitting, and those whose lifestyle is not, does not correlate with their income declaration, or who have never even filed income tax return in the first instance. So the clarion call is declare your income, declare your assets, and pay the tax that is due on them.
Let's bring in Mr. Ayo Salami into this conversation. Mr. Ayo Salami, the NERGP is expected to be implemented, of course, using, taxation as one of the sources for, funding. Now, we understand that, of course, there are two steps, one that the government intends to do. One is to ensure compliance, with the tax laws. The other is, of course, to now expand the catchment or coverage area, of those that are supposed to, pay tax. Now, let's look at the compliance. What factors or what are the propelling drivers for evasion? Because that is one key, fault that experts have pointed out in our tax administration.
Thank you very much, Claire, for the question. I think the real issue is that beyond trying to expand the tax net in order to enhance compliance, the critical factors that also matter is the fact that the tax laws also have to keep pace with the realities of our time. And I'll give a very good example in this regard. If you look at the two major tax laws we have in the country today, that's the two major corporate income tax laws. That's the Corporate Income Tax Act and then the Petroleum Profit Tax Act. The first one, CITA, was enacted in 1961, and I think there was a reenactment in 1979. Since then, there has not been a major or landmark review of that law up to today. For the Petroleum Profit Tax Act, the first enactment was in 1959, and then there was a major review, I think, in 1991. Since then, no major review was carried out on that law. So as we speak today, one thing that could enhance easy compliance is consistency of those laws, and in a way, the laws being able to adapt to our situation as a country today. But what you find is that for those two laws, there are provisions that are conflicting and, in fact, sometimes overlap. And that does not create or give some kind of clarity and certainty as to what taxpayers should do. So for me, I think as we are as a country today, for us to facilitate compliance or greater compliance than what we have today, then we have to take a holistic review of those laws in order to have a robust and dynamic tax system which is going to be responsive to the needs of our country as we have today.
All right, Mr. Salami, thank you very much. You've already raised the question of PITA and CITA. Just to move back again to VADEs, I would like the chair of the FRS, Mr. Fowler, again to speak on this aspect. For purposes of additional clarity, when you say voluntary assets and income, what are the assets that have been targeted, or what assets have been itemized? You were chair of Lagos Inland Revenue Service. Yeah. Lagos, of course, has the land use charge, which is a property tax. Right. Now, will your assets, say for a resident in Lagos, also form part of this? And to whom are you declaring this? If your property is in Lagos, to whom do you pay your tax? If your income, which is a function of residency, to whom are you supposed to declare all of this for the benefit of our viewers?
And how do you determine the worth of what is being declared?
That's right.
Okay, very simple. What has happened now is that the federal government and the state governments have what we call constitutional independence in terms of revenue, but now we're working together. So if you're an individual and you have property in Lagos State, and you reside in Lagos State, that is where you're supposed to declare and pay your taxes. Now, if you have property also abroad, which you are generating rent on, which forms part of your income, you also have to declare that. Now, very simple, you can just walk into any office of the, for example, Lagos State Internal Revenue Service and say you want to declare your assets. You're not a taxpayer. At that point in time, they'll give you a tax ID. You'll declare your assets. They'll compute the amount of taxes you should pay. But under VADEs, there's also the opportunity for you to pay over a period of time, maximum of 3 years. So the chairman of that state board can say, okay, you owe 500,000 naira. Can you pay it over 12 months? And then you enter some agreements with the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service. They'll not charge you interest. They'll not charge you penalty. And they'll give you a time period to pay those taxes. Now, if you're a corporate account holder and you want to register, you walk into any FIRS office and say you want to apply under VADEs. You bring out your information to the best of your ability. They'll compute your taxes, give you the same conditions also. You pay over a period of time without any interest and penalty. Now, because we have a very close working relationship, if, for example, you find out that even an FIRS office is closer to you, you can walk into the FIRS office as an individual, we'll collect your information and pass it on to the State Internal Revenue Service. So in terms of who gets the revenue, individuals will pay to their respective State Internal Revenue Services, corporate organizations will pay to the FIRS. But the whole idea is that if we empower government both at the state and federal level, both tiers of government will have sufficient funds to provide those services. A lot of people always ask or say government isn't doing anything or not doing much. But we have to realize that government requires revenue to do these things that you and I want.
Yeah, Claire, I was just wondering. There's still on the policy framework that governs all of this. I just want us to return to Professor Abiola Sani in our Lagos network studios. Your earlier, Professor Sunday, when you were speaking, you referred to the fact that, okay, if a person's lifestyle doesn't quite match the level of returns or level of tax that the individual pays, then questions might arise. Some persons would argue that lifestyle is a derivative of consumption, and therefore consumption tax ordinarily should take care of that. So why would the government now seek to escalate the level of taxation paid by an individual simply because on the face of it the individual has an ostentatious lifestyle?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Ideally, people don't just become millionaires, billionaires overnight without reflecting in their tax return, because it's a case of tree and fruit. The fruits must derive from the tree. So if somebody is living larger than life lifestyle, the tax authority can justifiably ask questions about the source of wealth and whether tax due had been paid on it. If government does not probe or interrogate issues like this, then government itself will not be seen to be very serious. In other society, if you have assumed certain lifestyle or you are using some luxury item, it must show in the tax return that you are filing. And in this way, government is able to track people's income and also how well they are complying with the tax law as far as income tax obligation is concerned. So relating to, it's a different ball game. Consumption tax is payable at the point of purchase. If you are buying a first-class ticket, you pay at the point of purchase. If you are holidaying in any resort center, you pay at the point of consumption. So, as far as consumption tax is concerned, those who have obligation under VADEs are the agents of collection. I mean, those who are collecting consumption tax on behalf of government. But relating to individual, the focus is on people who, especially those who have not been paying or those who have never filed returns, to come and explain how. The kind of questions that electorates in United States were asking Trump is the kind of question that the tax authority will be justified to ask such a person in this circumstance.
Again, Mr. Salami, you earlier on talked about, laws that, the tax laws that have not been reviewed. Now, with all the policies and programs that government have put in place to, shore up our tax administration, the VADEs, of course, the tax on luxury goods, the, is it tax holiday Thursday and all that. How might the non-review of these laws, of those laws, affect the implementation of these policies?
A very good example here. If you look at the Pension Reform Act of 2004, that law was operated for about 10 years. And in 2014, based on input from stakeholders, from the industry and everything, that law was repealed and reenacted. In other words, there were feedback from those who operated that law. And then with the feedback from those people, government was able to see where the loopholes were and in a way enact a law that is now a bit of responsive to the needs of the industry. Another good example is the Tertiary Education Tax Act, which repealed the Education Tax Act and reenacted another one to take into consideration the needs of the people. Now, the real issue is if you have laws that have been enacted that are not a bit reflective of the current realities, the likelihood is that taxpayers may be at a loss as to in terms of conflicting provisions which they might want to adopt, and then in terms of further compliance. So in a way, the laws have to be seen to be reflective of the current situation. The laws have to be seen to be easy to apply, and then the compliance process too must be simplified enough for each and every taxpayer to be able to take advantage of it and meet its obligation. But in a situation where the laws are conflicting, where the laws are not seen to be clear, and then that gives room for what I would call improper conduct, even on the part of the taxpayers. So for me, I think it's important that those laws are reviewed and then brought in consonance with the current realities.
How easy might it be to implement VADEs? Salami, how easy, I just want your opinion on the implementation of VADEs. With all that you have said, how easy do you think it will be, to effect the implementation?
I think for me, many factors would what I'll call critical success factors to the success of VADEs. One of which is how ready is the FRS in terms of IT infrastructure and human resources. For instance, the FRS chair has told us this morning that the gulf between 14 million people who currently pay VATs, who currently comply with tax laws, and then the 69.9 million who the total productive citizens in Nigeria who are potentially taxpayers is about 55 million. So if, for instance, we do know that according to the Joint Tax Board, most of those 69.9 million productive Nigerians are in the informal sector. So the question is, how do we enhance or entice those the operators in that sector to take advantage of VADEs? What are the other things that the government could do to basically facilitate an impromptu and voluntary compliance of this sector, taking advantage of the current scheme? That is one. Second point is that in terms of IT infrastructure, I do know that one of the publications from the FRS in the VADES website is that people, Nigerians in diaspora, who are willing to comply with the laws, who are willing to turn a new leaf, could actually submit their tax filings online or appoint an agent in Nigeria to do that for them. Question is the FRS infrastructure robust enough at this critical point in time to take on such applications from Nigerians outside the country? That's also another factor. So, I mean, a whole lot of factors could affect the implementation of VADEs, and I think, again, the FRS too has to be up to the task in terms of responding speedily to requests to file returns on time.
All right, Mr. Ayo Salami, thank you very much again. We'll come back to you, but we earlier indicated that the third guest would, of course, materialize in the Lagos Network studios. He's there already. It's a familiar face also on Good Morning Nigeria. Mr. Muda Yusuf is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Muda Yusuf, if we can see you on the screen right away, we'd like to welcome you to the program this morning.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Just before we fire our first question to you, let me quickly return to Professor Abiola Sani. Let's clarify this issue on the basis of the explanation also proffered by the chairman of the FIRS. Namely, what are we saying here? You know, it invades the new national tax policy that is under review and so on and so forth. Because ordinarily, I mean, tax scholars would argue that the powers to impose tax are distinct from the powers to collect. Now, what are we seeing here? Are we seeing a unitary taxation system? Are we seeing an erosion of fiscal federalism at a time that there is also increased agitation for fiscal federalism? Are the states and the local governments all subsumed under VADEs and whatever else, you know, it's on the cards with regard to the new drive to increase the tax revenue of governments of the federation?
Thank you, Kingsley. The constitutional framework for allocation of taxing powers is problematic because you have a situation where personal income taxation in terms of administration is at the state level. So this inexorably will lead to leakages because people can move income across states, also even across the country. So this calls for cooperation between stakeholders, principally the state and the federal government. And that is what all the three levels of government are doing. I do not think this is centralization, the kind of centralization we have been very critical of. Rather, this is a manifestation of cooperative federalism, which is the trend in other developed federal system. So we have an arrangement where each level of government recognizes its limitation and also the need for collaboration or cooperation with other levels of government. And it's commendable that for the first time, states and federal are working together progressively towards the development of the tax system. We must commend the initiative, and we must even seek to go beyond that and then address the fundamental issues about who has power to tax what. I'm a student of fiscal federalism, and I've always been very, very critical of any form of over-centralization. But what we have here is a situation where the three are working together in order to get the job done. You had the FIRS chair saying that, look, they are even ready to provide support, make their facilities available for any state. So if an individual who is liable to pay in Kano walks to the FIRS office, all the FIRS we do will be to collate all the necessary documents and pass them to the relevant tax authority. And at the end of the day, payment is made to the relevant tax authority. And I didn't even hear the FIRS say that they are going to charge anything. This is really commendable. And if you look at other developed federal system, this is the trend. In Canada, there is tax rental agreement between the provinces and the central government. There are situations where even a state might tell another level to collect on his behalf based on certain parameters or certain terms. So we should encourage these initiatives and go beyond it to address the constitutional framework ultimately. Some of this, I believe, will come to when we get to the stage of tax law review, because the tax policy document had proposed major review of the tax law, and I believe that the Federal Ministry of Finance is going to set that process in motion very soon. And we'll have opportunity to receive comments, memoranda from stakeholders on the right way to go. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Professor Sani. Again, Muda Yusuf, we've introduced him earlier on. He's the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Yusuf, once again, thank you for joining us. Now, let's look at, we're told that a large number of those who right now are complying with tax payment fall under PE, that's the pay-as-you-go system, while, of course, the corporates are left out. It becomes even more critical at this period in our history when a lot of, corporate outfits are closing up. Most of them cannot even meet up with their recurrent overhead. So how might the various, tax windows that have been espoused by the government, tax on luxury goods, VAT increased to 15% by 2018, how might they affect your members?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, let me say that the effectiveness and efficiency of tax administration could make a whole lot of difference in the tax revenue that government gets. To that extent, I would like to commend the steps being taken by the FIRS and the government on ensuring that the efficiency of tax administration is improved. We have seen similar experience in Lagos. Incidentally, it was the current chair of FIRS that was in Lagos, and we saw how we experienced dramatic changes in tax revenue, almost 6 or 7 folds because of the efficiency of tax administration. But having said that, I'd like to go back a little to what Mr. Ayo Salami was saying about the dynamic nature of the economy and the need to also ensure that the tax laws are also dynamic. First of all, let's look at the payee. The tax allowance for payee, for instance, the consolidated tax allowance, I think, is about 200,000 naira, plus, I think, 20% of gross income. And this 200,000 naira tax allowance was fixed in 2011. And the whole idea of the tax allowance, in my view, is to give allowance to the workers, at least to have some breathing space in order to be able to meet their revenue. If the allowance was fixed 6 years ago at 200,000 with plus 20% gross income, now look at what the cost of living is and has been between then and now. Because I'm talking about this within the context of the need for equity, even in the tax system, particularly from the point of view of the working class, those who pay the payee. Now, the individual has to provide very costly for education, because the public education system has collapsed. You have to pay high school fees. If you have 3 children or 4 children in a place like Abuja or Lagos, you know what that means. If you have to pay rent, an average 3-bedroom flat in Lagos or in Abuja, you know how we are talking about 2 to 3 million. If you have medical conditions and you have to go to hospitals, you don't have the public hospitals to go to. You have to go to private hospitals. For transportation, you have to struggle to put your own car on the road. So I'm saying all this so that we also have a framework that will ensure fairness to those who currently pay tax on their payee, so that we don't squeeze them to the point that they even lose the purchasing power for them to be able to even buy things or, patronize what is produced by business. That is one level of my intervention. The second level is that when we talk about tax, there is too much emphasis on revenue. We also need to use tax or tax policy to also stimulate investment. You can use tax to generate, but you can also use tax to stimulate investment, because as we speak now, we need to encourage private sector to create more jobs. We need more investment. We need more investors. We need to target sectors in which government cannot fund, like infrastructure, for instance. We're talking of power, we are talking of roads, and we are talking of private sector participation in all these areas. I've not heard from the policymakers or even from the tax authority what specific tax policies have been put in place to ensure that we make Nigeria a very good investment destination. not just for foreign investors, even for domestic investment. So we need to deploy our tax policies to also stimulate and incentivize investment. Because private investment can bring more to this economy than what the government revenue can deliver. If you have the right kind of policies, not just tax policies, foreign exchange policies, monetary policies, trade policies, investment policies, all these policies have to be properly coordinated in a way that we're able to drive more investment. So the investment argument in tax and in our tax system seems to be almost being crowded out by the fact that we are so focused on revenue. So these are the things that I think we need to look at. For Lagos, of course, our members they are coping, they are paying their taxes. But again, it's not just about federal tax, it's also about state taxes. Because if you set up a business, the first set of government officials you see on your business premises are the tax officials. All the regulatory authorities who will tell you what fees to pay and all of that, either at the federal, the state, or even the local government levels. So as we coordinate on all this, I think it is important that we also recognize the need to create the right kind of space for investment, for investors, so that we can create more jobs. That is what the ERDP is all about. And even in the ERDP, there's a big scope for the private sector to play a role. And if the environment is not conducive from the tax perspective, the private sector will not be able to contribute what is supposed to contribute to the development of the country and the creation of jobs.
All right. That's Mr. Muda Yusuf speaking to us from our Lagos Network studios. We'd like to thank you. You raised a number of points, of course, in addition to the other guests, and also to indicate that we have reactions already coming in from our viewers who have sent in their tweets using the Twitter handle, as you can see at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen at NTAGMN. We'll take those tweets. Of course, we'll also pursue the various issues that have been raised by the guests after this short break.
The Future Assured project of the wife of the president, Aisha Muhammad Buhari, is carrying out free medical screening and distribution of food items at various IDP camps while ensuring the economic empowerment of women through training and skill acquisition. In recognition of her efforts, wives of governors have lent their voices and support.
In Kogi State, we feel the impact of Future Assured, especially in women and children.
The Future Assured program of Mrs. Aisha Muhammad Buhari, the wife of the president, has been very assuring and still reassuring in Sokoto State. It has impacted positively in the areas of humanity, especially women and children.
Supports the Future Assured initiative. Email programs@futureassured.org.ng. Future Assured, promoting and protecting the lives of Nigerian women and children. You fall victim because you care about saving a little money.
When I'm not blind, I'm not stupid. I'm here to cross over and take Sole, ferry ship.
You fall victim because you care about your car.
What is it? Smoke, smoke on your car. Oh, smoke. They
cash in on your fear.
A dangerous road they so then they rob people, they keep you for years.
And they point.
You want to over and want to get it done by go call them.
This week, your rib-cracking comedy, Professor John Bull, dwells on roadside wars of the people in this episode titled Point and Kill. We are not talking about fish. Beware.
This is impetuous. This is prodigious. This is wondrous.
And laugh like never before.
How dare you enter my house without at least knocking?
Why are you trying to become my dear sweet professor?
I am sweet Abednego.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
The largest data network. Glow Unlimited.
I'm downloading is on 95%. It's still on. Eh?
Introducing
Introducing Airtel Unlimited Data Plans. Get Unlimited 10 for 10,000 Naira. Get Unlimited 15 for 15,000 Naira. And Unlimited 20 for 20,000 Naira. Unlimited data. Unlimited you.
Airtel, the smartphone network.
All right, it's not over for us yet. We're only just beginning the second leg, according to Kingsley. Let's quickly take a look at the tweets that we have received. And this one comes from Festus Akimboyewa. And it goes, narrow tax base puts excessive pressure on Nigeria budget. Nigerians will pay taxes if they can measure the benefit they receive from it.
And this tweet is from Law Alpha C. Taxing people and companies without requisite infrastructural and economic growth amounts to extortion and exploitation.
And Daily Jack Solomon tweets, the way out is for the Nigeria tax system to be reformed such that affluent people with many properties and luxuries are made to pay more taxes.
This is from Oluwatoyin, says tax issue in Nigeria is a serious one. Citizens feel reluctant to pay their taxes.
Again, coming from Jack Solomon, Daily, multiple taxation at the federal, state and local level has made many firms relocate to other African countries. A need for tax policy review.
And Sunny Michael Omakoje tweets, in summary, to get this reform right, we must deploy technology into the process of collection to reduce the current fraud in the system.
And Mumakbo Ukedojo, I hope I got that correct, tweets, great idea about tax reformation, but taxing the poor and needy to enrich the wealthy and looters is man's inhumanity to man, power corrupt.
That's right. Another one from Daily Jack Solomon. We support reforming the tax system, provided the Nigerian masses will not be at the receiving end. In developed countries, you must pay your tax. All right, those are the first set of tweets that we are taking this time. Just to return to our Lagos network studios, you saw them on the screen a moment ago. Mr. Muda Yusuf, one of the issues that you talked about a moment ago had to do with the purposes or the utility of the tax system. The revenue on the one hand, and then the other stimulating investment. And it is taken to stimulate investment. You talked about, of course, there are things we know about tax breaks, tax holidays, and waivers. Some persons argue that we have seen tremendous abuse of tax holidays and waivers on the system, and yet the kind of investment that you anticipate or you look forward to, we haven't seen those kinds of investment. If anything, companies have been enriched to the detriment of the collective national purse.
Yes, I agree with you. There may have been some abuses here and there, but that is an institutional problem. The fact that institutions don't do what they are supposed to do does not distract from the significance of deploying tax policies to stimulate investment. As I told you, this government hasn't got the revenue to fix our infrastructure and to fix a whole lot of things. And if you continue to depend on the budget to fix things, I will have to wait for a long time. Even if we are able to make progress in the area of tax compliance, there is so much that we can do, even with that tax revenue. So it is very important, if there are failings in the implementation of incentives, waivers and all of that, I think we need to strengthen our institutions. The fact that institutions are weak and incentives and policies are not working does not take away the fact that we need to get the policies right. Because tax policy should also be deployed to stimulate investment. Government has said it now and again, both at the level of the federal government and the level of the state government, even the ERGP, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the Infrastructure Master Plan is dependent almost 80% on unexpected private sector funding. You know, and for this to happen, we need to ensure that we stimulate the investment using tax policies. As for abuses, I mean, if there are abuses, appropriate sanctions should be imposed on the private sector organization that has abused. And if we need to strengthen our institutions, we should so do to ensure that these institutions are strengthened. And I must also say this, most of the tax consultants that sometimes are also engaged, because whatever their remuneration is dependent on the amount of tax they collect. Sometimes they impose unnecessary burden on the taxpayers, on businesses. Because whatever you give them is a function of what they collect. Sometimes some of the charges and things they impose, the bills they bring, are sometimes over-bloated. So we need to also structure the way of remuneration, the way we remunerate the tax consultants in a way that the incentive will not be for them to be imposing high bills on the taxpayers. I think this is also an important point that I need to make at this point.
Right, let's again bring in the chairman of the FIRS here. I know you've assimilated, most of the contribution that our guests have made, but in addition to what you've got to respond to them, also look at VADEs. It's not mandatory, it's obligatory. For corporate, is it mandatory?
Well, it's an opportunity. Now, if after the period that VADEs ends, you do not come forward on your own, we do have information, and we'll come out after you, and we'll prosecute you, and you'll still pay the taxes that are due.
Okay, for corporate entities, that might be easier to do.
And individuals also.
So what about those who, for instance, do business in their cars and their homes, who are not under your radar?
Well, like I said, we're working together. At the state level, you do have, if you have a vehicle, on an annual basis, you renew your vehicle license. So there'll be a name. So that is one step of being able to find the individuals who have vehicles who are not taxpayers. I'll give you a typical example. In Lagos, we had a working relationship with LASMA. And any time you are caught for a traffic offense, they'll ask you to show evidence of your tax. When we started off the program then, on an average annual basis, over 12,000 traffic offenders were found not to be in the tax net. And that helped grow the tax net. So if it happens nationwide, you have a vehicle, you're going to renew your vehicle license, they should ask for evidence of your tax clearance certificate. So there are ways of us capturing individuals, same way there are ways for us to capture corporate organizations. We are in discussion with immigration, and at the appropriate time, before you can get any service from immigration for a new passport, for a renewal of your passport, they'll ask you for evidence of your tax clearance certificate. So,
provided you are gainfully employed.
Yes, yeah.
Provided.
And that's the key thing we should realize. When they say a burden, you only pay tax when you earn an income or when you make a profit. So it's not, in quote, a burden on the needy. It's not a burden on those who are not employed. But what it does do, like the gentleman from the Chamber of Commerce said, we pay high school fees to the private sector because government is not empowered to provide free education. We pay high medical bills to private hospitals because government is not empowered to provide free health care. So it's a trade-off. We first of all have to empower government to provide required infrastructure in terms of roads, in terms of safety, in terms of education, in terms of health, and then new businesses will be more inclined to come in and invest. I mean, I salute the businessmen who have the love of Nigeria, who invest, who borrow money from banks, invest, create businesses within Nigeria, employ people, and basically what we need to do to support them is for you and I to pay our taxes.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Fowler, just before I pop my question, are you sure there will not be some abuse if you have an omnibus requirement that before, for instance, you obtain a passport, come up with your tax clearance certificate? Some immigration officer might say, look, no tax clearance, no passport.
Well, he'll be right to say so. I mean, because it's a service.
And assuming the applicant is not employed.
It's not employed.
They will show proof that you're not employed.
Well, I mean, let's look at it this way. Yes. If he's not employed and he has, or let me put it this way. If, depending on your age, you're 30 years old, you're not employed, you have no income. So the question is, what do you need a passport for? Where are you traveling to? If you can't, you're not employed, where are you going to buy your ticket?
This is right.
It is right, but the Constitution also says that every working adult who earns an income has to pay tax. But it is a right, fine. But you can also get a tax certificate with nil income. You still will go to the tax office, claim you're not employed, you have no income, and they'll also give you a tax certificate with nil taxes.
Well, Mr. Fowler, thank you very much. I mean, let's not roll back to the years of communism where it was an offense not to be employed. But let me ask this question with regard to the expectation. The figures you've quoted, some 37.5 million MSMEs that are in the country, only about 14.5 of them are currently...
In total?
In total, yes, about 14.5 of them. Whatever the numbers are. Now, let's begin to reduce it to the practical terms. Taking a bearing from one of the points articulated by Mr. Muda Yusuf, namely tax allowances. You know, we see that in the payee system. Now, how then would you compute the tax allowances for those who are really in the informal sector? That's one leg of my question. The second leg also relates to the fact that, okay, we've been having all kinds of saccharine exclamations these days with regard to the earnings of farmers. Farmers are now becoming millionaires, you know, because they are growing rice, X, Y, Z. Do this form part of the persons whom you are seeking to get into the tax net? And if so, how do you calculate their taxable allowances? And how do you now calculate the taxable income? And how do you manage all of this, particularly in the informal sector?
Well, in the informal sector, it's very simple. Under VADEs, for example, they have the right to declare their income based on their own analysis. And then based on that, they'll pay tax. But what we do, or what has been done in the informal sector, is that we have what we call presumptive tax. So you go into a market, and you've got 100 traders. They're in different categories. They'll have a range in each category in terms of income earned. And the leaders of the market will even guide you and tell you this is how much income the shop boy earns, this is how much income the distributor earns, this is how much income the wholesaler earns. And based on that, they'll pay their taxes. So they themselves have a rough idea as to how to estimate the amount of taxes paid by each group. I'll give you a typical example. In Ogun State, for example, they met with all the Okada riders, and right now they pay an average of 120 million per month as taxes based on the income they make. So
that is all the Okada riders?
Exactly, in Ogun State.
Yes.
Now if you times that by 12, it's over 1 billion naira. Now the impact that could do for a state is tremendous.
In terms, back again to VADEs, before we go back to our Lagos network studios, there were always reports about abuses in the collection and remittance system, particularly with regard to, say, withholding tax. I mean, persons who have whatever amount it is, say, a fixed deposit, at maturity, when you get your interest, the interest is usually less 10% of the withholding tax. And banks, obviously, are in this category. And then there are companies who deduct the tax that on the pay-as-you-earn basis, and they do not remit. So withholding tax and payee remittances, are these also the focus of VADEs? And if so, what are the likely expectations with regard to compliance and sanctions?
Okay, thank you very much. Now let me talk about what FIRS has done. Last month we launched 6 solutions, electronic solutions, and one has to do with what you said: non-remittance of withholding tax, non-remittance of VAT, etc. So now everybody who has a contract and the withholding tax has been deducted, within 45 days you can confirm whether that withholding tax has been paid on your behalf. All you need to do is provide your email address to the FIRS, and any payment on your behalf, you'll be advised by email of tax credit. You can print that receipt in the convenience anywhere in the world, and you can confirm whether your withholding tax has been remitted on your behalf. The same thing with VAT. And so we have deployed technology. You can register your company at home, pay your stamp duty online. You can file your returns equally online. And we have made this information available to all state internal revenue agencies. So for those who want to get on board, they're free to also join. So basically, the non-remittance of VAT, when deducted, non-remittance of withholding tax will soon become a thing of the past. And what we have done in FIRS, we're taking it a step further. We did find out there are some organizations who charge VAT and not even registered taxpayers. So we designed a form, and we're going to ask that that be framed and displayed in every point where they have their businesses. So even if you go somewhere and they charge you 5% VAT, for you to be sure that your VAT is going to be remitted to the Federation, they'll have to display a sign to show they're, first of all, taxpayers. And we have to realize that 85% of the VAT collected is actually shared among the states, which will also empower them to provide more services.
Okay, let's get Professor Sani's views. Professor Sani, Mr. Fowler here has told us that to shore up our tax collection, one might be required to produce tax clearance certificate, to renew your driver's license, to, you know, get or renew your passport, probably to also access maybe healthcare services, education, and all that. That's on a probability note now. That would amount to, you know, putting a lot of burden on those who probably might not be, you know, within the, might not be income earning or profit making people. So might there be a more effective way of doing this, you know, than putting this burden on the people?
You see, as a tax administrator, they face very challenging situations. And when you have targets, there's a tendency to deploy all strategies and all that. But we must recognize that production of tax clearance certificate for accessing government services is a matter of law. And the legal framework is clear. There are limited circumstances where tax clearance certificate can be demanded before any citizen can access government services. But in practice, it has been expanded through extra-legal means. For example, in court, to even stand as surety for somebody who is on trial, they require tax clearance certificate. And I've criticized this to the fullest extent because it has a way of depriving citizens who are in detention their freedom unduly. So we must look for modern means of actually tracking compliance. And I'm happy the FRS boss has said that they are leveraging on technology to do this. There is no developed tax system where taxes are collected through this means. And we must also move our tax system to that level. If we sustain investment on technology and we also follow the prescription of the tax policy to the letter, we will move beyond this type of strategy within a short time. And that is what I look forward to.
I was wondering, Professor Abiola Sani, I would like you to respond to the policy framework about which Mr. Muda Yusuf also spoke, namely that, according to him, there's a great deal of emphasis, or otherwise rather too much emphasis on revenue, rather than using tax as an instrument to incentivize investment. Okay. What are we saying, or what should we look forward to under the new tax policy? And in answering that question, could you also speak about the abuses that we have seen with regard to waivers and tax holidays?
I agree entirely with Mr. Muda Shiru that the fact that there are abuses does not mean that incentives should not be provided. But the tax policy is very clear. Taxation system will be used to encourage employment, to encourage growth. But the issue now is that it's not going to be targeted at individuals. Rather, they will be sector-based. I cannot envisage any tax system without incentives because taxation is an instrument of controlling behavior. There are things that government wants people to do. And one of the ways you can encourage them to do it is by providing incentives. If you look at the tax policy, it is very clear, especially in an economy with recession, that for you to galvanize and mobilize resources to certain sector, you have to provide certain incentives. And government must see this not in short term alone, but also in medium term and long term. Without incentives, NLNG project couldn't have seen the light of the day. Without some incentives, the telecom sector probably would have been delayed for a few more years. And we need to strategically develop the appropriate incentives in order to galvanize resources to certain sector. There are some interest groups that have been communicating vigorously with government on the need to grant them certain incentives, and they have demonstrated the capability of growth that is possible in that sector. One area that readily comes to mind is REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust Scheme. And the stakeholders have said that all over the world, including Kenya, some other developing country, they've been able to grow that sector because of incentives. And government in Nigeria must also proactively put in place the necessary framework to achieve this. You see, the tax policy has provided the framework or the benchmark for this. It's now for the various government departments, government ministries, government agencies to develop the appropriate framework. And Mr. Mudashiru said it. It goes beyond tax policy. There must be appropriate monetary policy, because monetary policy and tax policy must be in sync, because you cannot clap with one hand. And the infrastructure base must also be revamped. If we do not do all this, the tax policy on its own cannot deliver.
All right, Professor Sonny, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Claire, I was wondering, maybe because we're almost getting close now to the end of the program, just I have another question, but let me just pop the question to you so that we can dispense with it almost immediately. The chairman of the FROS, Mr. Babatunde Fowler here, was earlier talking about the fact that, look, if you have assets abroad, for instance, and then you earn income, let's say rent from those assets, we will expect you to declare your rental income and then also pay tax. I'm wondering how this might work out, assuming there's deliberate under declaration of the income, or if at all there is no income. How would this be enforced? And the question is on the basis, has the rule of international law changed? Is any foreign government going to help you pursue your revenue costs?
Thank you, Kingsley. That has always been in the law. A resident is under obligation to declare income from home and abroad. But the administrative dimension of it is a different kettle of fish. And that is why the collaboration between FRS and the states is very, very important. If you look at the federal might and also the right of the power of the federal government to conclude treaties with other nations, government is leveraging on this to exchange information with various countries where Nigerian residents might have properties. You see, with international cooperation, there is now an erosion of the strict principle of territoriality. Because the theory is that a nation cannot enforce its tax law in another country. But the modern trend is that nations now recognize the need for cooperation, the need to exchange information, to share information, and I believe that is what federal government is seeking to do. Federal government recognizes its limitation in this regard, and that is why it's now signing treaties with other multilateral treaties, bilateral treaties, so that they will be able to access some of this vital information. And I also understand that there are certain institutions that have been engaged to help in tracking some of these assets globally. So there is going to be...
All right, we do apologize, Professor Sani. We just quickly like to take the comment of Mr. Salami. Mr. Salami, tax holiday has also been advanced as a measure. How effective might it be as a tool to ensure compliance?
The comments made by the DG is very apt. The essence of tax holiday is to incentivize companies who perhaps are in isolated industries in order to encourage the production of those items which the government itself has identified as critical for the development of certain sectors in the economy. So for me, I think it's important that that policy be retained. Like DG said, if there are infractions, either from a part of the institutions that are meant to implement the policy or from certain taxpayers who are taking undue advantage of that policy, those infractions should be isolated and dealt with. But critically, it is important that we retain such incentives in order to incentivize those critical mass of investors who are willing to put their money down and develop that sector of the economy. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ayo Salami. And then back again to Muda. Mr. Muda Yusuf, very briefly, you talked about the fact that the government should look at scaling down incentives for tax consultants. We saw the rise of tax consultants under the military regime, but we still have them around. If you were to make a recommendation with regard to a downward trend in terms of incentives for the tax consultants, what would you say?
Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't quite mean to say that the incentives should be scaled down. I was making reference to the framework for the incentives. It is not quite right to have an incentive framework that is dependent on how much they're able to recover from the taxpayer. Because what that does is that some of them, and again, because the tax laws and tax process can be so complex, that for many people who don't have the capacity to engage consultants, it is very easy for the tax consultants to just slam you with heavy bills. And some of them do that because the higher the bills they're able to slam on you, the higher the amount they're able to recover, the more commission they get. So we need a framework that will be more equitable, that will not be so much dependent on how much they recover from the client. And finally, let me also make this point. In line with the tax policy, the emphasis of our tax should be more on indirect tax rather than direct tax. Because we need to put all these things also in context. In the context of a developing economy, it is more effective to emphasize indirect tax than direct tax. We have a huge informal sector, as has been mentioned earlier. We have a huge agricultural sector. How much revenue can we, even as we speak, how much revenue can we trace to agric? And agriculture accounts for over 20% of GDP. If you ask the tax authorities, less than 1% of revenue is coming from agriculture. And yet, people who are in that sector or in the formal sector, they spend, they consume, they ride big cars, some of them, fly around and so on. So I think it is better to focus more on taxing what people spend on.
Okay.
All right, that's good.
Yes.
Sorry, we pressed you, Mr. Fowler. You again, the two issues that I would like you to respond to. One, greater emphasis on indirect rather than direct taxation, and secondly, lowering the threshold of incentives for tax consultants.
Well, not to burst the bubble, but let me tell all taxpayers now that tax consultants can be of assistance, but also the FIRs equally can be of assistance. We can act as advisors. We can teach you how to put your books together, and we don't charge anything. It's free of charge.
Mr. Fowler, you know that we are bringing our invoice.
All right, direct and indirect taxation, yes.
Now, what the gentleman did say, yes, there are certain sectors that don't seem to contribute that much, and he spoke about agric. But they said that the owners of these large establishments have nice cars, they fly abroad, which takes us back to what I was trying to explain. Based on consumption, if you buy a car, you should pay VAT. Your information will be in our database. So you buy a car worth 50 million. We should be able to cross-check your returns and how much tax you paid. You fly abroad, you use your passport, you buy airline tickets, which is all consumption related. We should be able to say, in 1 year, you spent or consumed 100 million based on flight tickets, purchase of vehicles, other things.
Mr. Fowler,
you're now tied down to what you declared as your gross income.
Yes, okay.
All right. Well, Mr. Fowler, of course, this is not a matter that we can possibly exhaust in one session. Just to indicate also that our viewers have the tweets. We just rush through, run through those tweets now. Pastor Arise Monday. I think what we should do is to leave collection of taxes on business and investment for the state governments, who will in turn remit percentages to the federal government.
There's a second one coming from him as well.
Well, that's right. The problem is not a tax law per se, but corruption and multiple taxes from the 3 tiers of government. Hence, taxpayers usually get confused.
And this comes from Akinwale Akinrade. It says, people evade tax due to poverty and government's infidelity. We hardly see the benefits of paying tax.
Bosa Nwora, the government needs to put up more sensitization that will compel evaders to see the importance of paying tax.
And Johnson Ago, taxation is not an end in itself. Don't sacrifice the purpose of taxation for the revenue of tax. Our system is peculiar in Africa.
Dexter Moses tweets, taxation is fine, but the fact remains that government must be accountable to us for any monies received, or else why should we pay taxes?
And this is coming from Akinrade Shegun. Taxes are compulsory for development of any country. My concern is the effective utilization of those taxes. Kudos to FIRS. Johnson
Ago, taxation is not all about collecting money. Tax policies can be used to encourage people to consume goods produced in Nigeria.
Finally, Dele Jack Solomon, majority of taxes are related to VAT, while property tax that affect the rich are not effectively manned by the agencies in charge.
All right, those are the tweets, and we would like to thank all our guests from the Lagos Network Studios. Our appreciation goes to Ayo Salami, who is a partner at KPMG. We also appreciate Mr. Muda Yusuf, DG, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Professor Abiola Sane of the Faculty of Law, University of Lagos, and Chair of the National Tax Policy Review Committee 2017. Gentlemen, appreciation to you from our Lagos Network Studios. And right here in the Abuja studios, we thank the chairman of the FIRS, Mr. Babatunde Fowler. Thank you for your contribution to our discussion.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
All right, next is sports, and we join our sports desk for details.
MFM FC have caught Plateau United's